Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like it need Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like it need Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.
Blast off on another epic episode of Hero Paranormal Podcast, broadcasting from the base at La Madre Mountain, just south of Area 51. My name is Ryan, the original spiritual hitman of the airwaves, bringing you an epic episode tonight. Although many stick to the narrative that little green men enter our airspace to cause trouble and havoc in the flying saucers they occupy, there is another truth. A truth so raw, rugged, and real that there is a good possibility the majority of the population wouldn't be able to handle it. We are going to get into that. Not just that truth, but we're going to find out what interdimensional entities might want with watching us and a whole lot more. On today's podcast, we have experiencer, podcaster, and amazing human being, Ryan Bledsoe. Ryan hosts the popular podcast, Bledsoe Said So. He is a member of a family that is well known for having connections in the invisible college of ufology, as Jacques Vallée calls it. In fact, his family introduced Diane Pasulka to the now famous Tyler D character from American Cosmic. The Bledsoe family has had contact from the Vatican, NASA, CIA, DoD, TTSA, and more, to name a few. Is there a reason things are presented to us in a way that is not exactly the truth? Ryan has a lot of info on a lot of topics, and I think this is going to be a heck of a great conversation. Ryan Bledsoe, welcome to the Hero Paranormal Podcast.
Hey, Ryan. Wow, that was an awesome introduction there. I didn't expect that.
I am so stoked to be talking to you. There is so many directions we can go, and it's hard, but let's assume that our listeners have no idea of your backstory. How would you best describe your affiliation with this phenomena?
Yeah, that's a very complicated answer that I'll try to do the best that I can in the short amount of time that we have. But basically, in 2007, my father, Christopher Bledsoe, was fishing on the Cape Fear River in North Carolina, and he had some encounters with these big orange balls of light and also white balls of light. I don't want to say like ships or saucers because they didn't look like that. They were literally light. And he came face to face with some entities by the end of the night. It was a pretty wild experience. There is a documentary out that it's been out about 14 years now, put out by the Discovery Channel, and I will say a word of caution to anybody that watches it. They didn't exactly portray us honestly. It was a little bit of a smear job, but, the good news is the core elements of the story are in the documentary. It's called UFOs Over Earth. But for the sake of, us here having the conversation now, I'll just kind of run over it a little bit. He met these entities, and they told him that they were the guardians, and that they tend to creation like a garden. And that went on for several years, continuing to see the lights in the sky and having like poltergeist-type activity in the home for at least 5 years until 2012 when he saw another entity face-to-face. I believe it was either Monday after Easter or Easter night. I can't quite recall, but it was a glowing woman with blonde hair and blue eyes and a long white dress that sparkled like the stars. And she called herself Hathor and basically said that, this story has to come out. It has to be told because it could potentially help humanity shift into the age of Aquarius. And the basic footnotes of that conversation with that entity was that there are people in power who are basically manipulating the population through fake alien stuff and, biblical apocalyptic drama being played out on a global scale to cause everybody to be in fear and terror.
Yeah. It seems to me that the media has risen to a position almost, people are just magnetically attracted to it, rely on it for background noise, you name it, and they're not necessarily giving us the correct information.
Right. That's exactly right.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought up that there is, as I'm sitting here looking at my letter, NASA letter from William Schneider, who I'm sure you've probably heard of, who used to work
I've heard of him, yeah.
Yeah, he used to work for Bigelow Aerospace. And it's a letter talking about Werner von Braun. And von Braun, who is kind of the father of modern aerospace, he, on his deathbed, sort of, this is allegedly, I'm sure you've heard this, alluded to the fact that if ever there was a alien invasion, quote unquote, that it was us, not them. And that just kind of is reminiscent of what we're discussing right now and just kind of oddly entered my mind. But
I tend to believe that, to be honest with you. I tend to believe that it's actually impossible for any sort of foreign species to invade from outer space and wreak catastrophes on unwitting populations. I just don't think that's allowed. I don't think that's possible. I think, if there was a being that was to have evolved enough to reach a cosmic level, it would already, spiritually be advanced enough to understand that that's not in accordance with cosmic harmony, if that makes any sense.
I think that's important. There's extremely important information here. And, it's been said that these beings come in different, sometimes sets of 3, 6, 9, other variations, but they look like little children, little angels, many different descriptions. Could you go into any of the descriptions your family's had or you've had?
Sure, absolutely. So the main, the night of January 2007, the original encounter, the entities that were seen were about 3 to 4 feet tall. They had red eyes. And again, I am just describing based on my father and also my brother who was there. I personally was not there that night. I have seen these things many years later, but just, from their description, they were 3 to 4 foot tall. They had red eyes that blinked kind of like camera shutters. It's a little weird, but they would kind of slowly open and shut like apertures, but they didn't blink at the same time. It was like the eyes would take turns blinking. And they glowed. They were translucent, like see-through. They could go invisible. And at one point when my brother was in the woods trying to just, they were fishing out in the woods, out deep in the country. So my brother, he grew up as a hunter. He wanted to try and get some deer corn and hand feed some deer. And he wasn't thinking he was going to be face-to-face with an entity. So he's deep in the thick of the brush and the bushes and all that. And he sees these little guys. And when they start looking at him, he can't move. And for about 2 hours, he's sitting there paralyzed. You just absolutely can't move. And then later, some entities that were more like 7 to 8 foot tall were seen by my father, who, again, later basically did what I would call like derobe. It was almost like they changed their form and they were made of light. They glowed like pure light. And then, of course, in 2012, he saw the female entity who looked like a white female human, but she glowed as well, and she was ethereal. And I personally have seen some things in the home, like shadow-type people, moving across the walls and things like that under great periods of trauma and stress. I've seen the opposite phenomenon, which would be like shadowy-type figures running around, but instead of dark black shadows, they're actually white, and they look like lights. Just imagine like if a shadow on the wall was actually white and it wasn't dark at all, and it was like a source of light running around independently with a little figure inside of it. Mm-hmm. We've seen, at this point, thousands of orbs, and the orbs are intelligent. They don't just appear in photos. You see them in person, too, when you come to our property. and they move around, and sometimes they have long, streaking tails of light. They get up close. Sometimes they're really far in the sky. And that's essentially all that I have experienced.
And it's pretty well known that these interdimensional entities are getting a lot of attention lately, both from media, but also the government. And there seems to be a divide where, of course, there is one camp that is weaponized and looking to interact in a more warlike scenario with these entities. And there's another camp which is more open-minded to the understanding that coexistence is, critical. So
right.
How do we rise above what the media is saying and find, from your perspective, the truth?
That's a very good question. And honestly, I'm just going to start by saying that people can only find the truth when they realize it's already inside them from the moment they were born. I do think that there is a great importance in understanding that there really is eternal consciousness that, ancient religions have called God or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter, and when you're born, that's already inside of you. And when people pay attention to that, I think they can intuitively figure out, this media is lying to me. They're trying to get me to be scared of this and that and the other. And I think intuition guides people to resonate with what is inherently and intrinsically true. Now, the next thing I would say is everybody should probably know by now in 2022 that the media is quite literally owned and operated by about 4 to 5 corporate dynasties, as well as the American intelligence agencies. So, I don't want to be rude towards anybody, but at this point, if people are listening to the news and they're listening to the mainstream media for a source of information about their daily life and what's going on in the world, I hate to say, but you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be believing that. You should take everything that comes out of the mainstream media with a grain of salt. And anyway, so some of the people that I met in NASA have even told me that face to face. Like, for example, one of the cover-ups I know for a fact they did was the Challenger explosion. It didn't happen exactly how they portrayed it in the media. And so I would say people need to really just look inward and think is this positive, or when I hear this bit of news or information, does it make me feel terror and fear? If it makes you feel terror and fear, it's not good for you. You shouldn't consume it. You shouldn't pay attention to it. You should cut it out of your life.
That's great advice. And Ryan, without asking you about the Challenger situation, there are many conspiracies online about the Challenger, so a lot of people can go out and look at that themselves, and some of the theories behind what may or may not have taken place. But I wanted to get into something that I feel that a lot of people, once you start a podcast, I know that you probably understand that it's kind of a scary road starting. And once you start, it is, right? You're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be... And then you're doing it, and then there's this feeling of I've gotta keep going no matter what. But the interesting thing is that I feel that it's a bit of a snare trap for a lot of individuals, as are a lot of groups like MUFON. Nothing against MUFON, but a lot of things, and I'm guilty of it. I'm a podcaster, but there is a group of individuals that have not been snared by this need to discuss these things in a public forum. And they are what has been called the Invisible College. And thank goodness they don't discuss this in a public forum, because they have become the backbone, really. Can we go into that a little bit?
Sure. Just exactly what would you like to know? Some of my experiences meeting some of these people, or if you want to kind of guide me in a direction.
I'll that's exactly. You rose to the occasion. Just experiences, just the circle, being in these circles, no need for names, but just kind of the experiences and the vibes and being in these circles. You know what I mean? Kind of so that the listeners get an idea, what it's like to be.
I do.
Yeah.
Okay. So without saying names, that actually makes it a little bit easier for me, because sometimes, even though I do say names, I do it for a particular reason at particular shows, and it does make me a little uncomfortable sometimes. But, I've said all the names on my own podcast too. So anyway, so without saying names, when I was 20 years old, which was, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe more like 18, 19. Because of my dad's experiences and it being televised and going worldwide and, just being like the talk of the ufology, so to speak, he got pretty heavily involved in the background with the American intelligence agencies from 2012 onward because of this entity interaction with the lady. It's what we call her. She called herself Hathor, but we just call her the lady. It's just what caught on. People out in the public have called her that. So anyway, he had this lady experience in 2012, and they started showing up literally to our house. And I first, personally, my father had been in contact with these people longer than me because naturally I was just a kid in college at the time. But I first met the Invisible College folks when I was 20 years old. He came to my house. And the vibe that I got from that, so to speak, was very genuine, very serious. And I don't necessarily mean like he's being genuine or telling the truth. What I'm saying is it was a very serious moment. Like this person was real. He had credentials. He flashed about 5 different identifications from government facilities, Air Force, CIA, NASA, et cetera, et cetera. And Area 51 was another one. Whether it's real or not, I don't know. He flashed it to let us know that he was here discussing certain matters. And he was a nice enough guy. He did pretty much request that we don't ever go publicly, like speaking about some of these things. But honestly, man, my conscience compels me to, if this material is important enough that it could, in some way help humanity raise its consciousness, I feel compelled to do the right thing and share what I know. Anyway, so some of the things he did was he brought these materials, these what have been popularly called meta materials, which is essentially something that didn't come from Earth, right? Mm-hmm. And when he put them in our hands, the members of my family, he did it one by one with different members of the family in the room, so none of us could communicate like what was going on. When we held both of these pieces of metal in our hands, we would feel this electric energy moving through our body. And it was very pleasant. It wasn't painful, but it was like real electrical current. And by the time he got through the 6th family member, which was my dad, he saved his for last, he was kind of shocked, the Department of Defense guy. And he basically said, like, I just want y'all to understand that I've only ever seen this with 3 other people. And the fact that you felt any sort of electrical current through your body proves to me without a doubt that you're being honest and that you really have had entity encounters. And we were kind of like, okay, this is really weird. He had like scientific isotope charts about these pieces of metal showing that they don't originate on Earth and things like that. He kind of got involved with my dad for a few years, developing like kind of cutting edge experimental cancer technologies through my dad's profound psychic breakthroughs. Kind of a long story there. And then sometime shortly after that, he being my father, got pretty heavily involved with the people behind Project Stargate, which is what the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats is about, mm-hmm. with George Clooney and Ewan McGregor, the real life person. And he got pretty heavily involved with them and some other CIA officials, and kind of like they were coming and investigating us and finding out at every turn. Like they would come and they would have experiences, or they would talk to so-and-so in the Department of Defense who had experiences at our house. And word spread that the Bledsoe family were genuine, honest people who opened their doors to everyone. And when you go there, you have experiences. And he being my dad, yet again, he kind of became a hit in these intelligence agencies behind the scenes. And they just kept coming and knocking. And most of them were pretty pleasant. We did get some death threats with some people were associated with the CIA. They were not all like that. But, I would say the vibe of the Invisible College is that they really do have some sort of profound occult knowledge about reality. And I want to very heavily repeat the word occult because, yes, they do study and talk about the occult in these intelligence agencies. They actually taught us about sacred symbolism like the Ouroboros and the 6-pointed star and the triangle and what it means when it's pointed up versus pointed down and things like that, sacred geometry. Freemason type initiatic stuff. They were really into that. And let's see, where was I going with that? kind of derailed myself there. I'm sorry. The vibe of the Invisible College was that they really had this profound occult knowledge, but they weren't necessarily motivated or interested to share it publicly, even slightly.
Exactly. Like, that's so cool that you said that, man. You nailed it, because these are spiritual entities, it seems.
Yes.
And it seems that although there is occult knowledge and some are aware of it and they discuss it in ways that the average citizen wouldn't understand, the interesting thing, when you were talking about the CIA officer, slash the one that had the CIA, NASA, Air Force, and the few other join up.
Yes.
What's very interesting is, just listening to this, you would think, oh, that sounds like an MIB. But I think it's interesting to point out, Ryan, that these are more almost like agents of light instead of darkness, like the typical MIB is typically. What I mean by that is it could just be my intuition, but it seems like these characters in the Invisible College are typically very charismatic, buoyant, not dark, dreary, and depressing. Can you give us can you shed a little light on that, or am I way off target?
I just being honest and speaking from the heart here, my experience has not been that.
Cool, man. Fair.
The Invisible College at every turn in one way or another has led to us being exploited or put in touch with individuals who harassed us or made comments about us, never speaking publicly about the knowledge that's been shared to us. And I would say that group was not really a net positive, having interacted with them. And it was actually other groups that we've interacted with who were profoundly more positive, not necessarily affiliated with the Invisible College. And my experience of the Invisible College is that it operates more like a secret society that hoards knowledge and dangles it.
Okay. I'm glad I asked that, because they kind of have
very good question.
They kind of have a media arm, and they seem to make themselves seem not, indirectly always indirectly through many of the same agents, but they make themselves seem very kind of cool, hip, always nice. And anyway, okay, I'm glad I asked that. That's a good proclamation you made, because I was way off. It makes sense that they're kind of a secret council. And going back to your family's kind of certificate of authenticity, let's say, in these Department of Defense circles and other intelligence circles, I have a question, and that is, what, in your opinion, and if you don't have an answer, that's fine, but if you had to guess, what would be the DoD's and other intelligence organizations' interest in a lot of this?
Maintaining control of public perception and sort of getting out. And I'm just being honest here. I'm not trying to disparage any institution. I'm just, like I said, my conscience compels me to just tell it straight. I know some people won't agree with this, but it is what it is, and my perspective of that, based on the life that I've lived, is that these intelligence agencies are motivated literally by getting out ahead of public perception of what this is, based on some conversations that I've even had with extremely high-level CIA officers. And when I say high-level, I mean people who ran entire departments on behalf of the CIA. What would be the equivalent of like an Army two-star general, very high-ranked individuals. And one of the things that this particular individual told me was that one of the reasons that they have never revealed the truth about the UFO phenomenon is because, A, it's not as simple as putting out a message, hey, a saucer has landed on our lawn, we're making peace with aliens. That's not the reality. What he told me the reality is, which, I obviously have experienced this and already knew this part, but what he told me the reality was is that it's truly a very mind-boggling, interdimensional phenomenon. Also, another buzzword that they throw at you when you're talking to them is ultra-terrestrial, meaning that they live in another dimension, pretty much overlapping ours, and they're always here and they're always around us, but in another plane of existence that we can't detect or, so to speak, phase into with our five senses. And basically what he told me is they're not exactly ready to go admit that to the public because it would create an extreme existential shock, which quite literally could have people of particular religious backgrounds committing mass suicides out of terror. Whether I buy that or think that's true or not, I don't know, but it was said to me. And then the other reason was, of course, government would totally lose its continuity of power because then the truth would be out that they've been lying and suppressing it for almost a century.
Now, I think that second shift would definitely happen. I think that would be a very real. I mean, there's a lot of cutting edge stuff going on, and that would come to a screeching halt. Now, looking at this from the perspective that you have through your experiences, a very strange, I guess, coincidence is how we met. And for those who
very weird, right?
I thought so, yeah.
That was extremely weird.
I never second guess a coincidence. I met your wonderful wife, and you had recently been married, and she has recently been on your podcast, who I think everybody should listen to and watch. She got into some things that I thought were really interesting on your most recent podcast. Not only
it came out today, by the way.
Yeah, great podcast, by the way. And I wanted to ask you how she has assimilated or dealt with some of these this bad tincture that was left by, what was it, UFOs over Earth, the bad taste in your mouth that that documentary and other things have left. How has she dealt of kind of being immersed? Because this is kind of like, this is her life now. How has she dealt being immersed into this?
Yeah, so that's a really good question too. One thing we actually totally forgot to mention on her episode of Bledsoe Said So. If anybody's trying to find it, that's the name of it, Bledsoe Said So. And the thing that she forgot to mention entirely was how she would also, in her adult life, after we've been together for several years, would go around town and just be at work or something, and people would walk into her place of work, and she would hear random strangers strike up conversations about our family, being crazy for seeing UFOs and things like that. And I think the first time that happened, not the story she told on my show when she was in school, but, as an adult seeing it in public, I think after that happened, it kind of hit her like, oh my gosh, they really have been tortured from this because, the reality is we thought the documentary, as MUFON and the Discovery Channel told us, we thought it was going to be like a smash hit and we were going to be vindicated. And then when it came out, they made us look really bad, and they falsely portrayed my father as being deceptive, which, totally not the case. I go into that in great detail on my show. And anyway, so after she had that encounter in public, I think the gravity of that may have hit her pretty hard. And, shortly after that, I'd say about a year or two, she started having experiences herself with the family, and then it was game on. I mean, she knew absolutely without a doubt that every bit of it was true. And, ever since then, she's been very well assimilated. At first, it was very difficult for her showing up, hearing all this wild stuff, not having experiences, with us having been together 2 or 3 years at this point. And then next thing you know, she's flying out to New York City, going to bar mitzvahs where, the director of the CIA is there and stuff like that. Very overwhelming, very shocking for her. But she pulled through it and really just made it her life, and has assimilated very well. And, here we are now. She's the manager of my podcast.
That's so cool. That is great. And I thought it was interesting. She was also your sister's best friend. So that was kind of difficult to probably handle that scenario.
Yeah. That's how we met. Yeah.
That's so cool, man. Now, getting back to some of those that are unaware a bit with things like American Cosmic, the Invisible College, sort of this unscripted coalition of people who are playing an important role. I think we briefly mentioned the TTSA, and have you had any interaction with the TTSA, and what was your opinion of some of their, you don't have to use names, but some of their ideas and ideologies and how that went?
I personally have met one member of TTSA. My dad has met about 4 or 5, or maybe even all of them. I can't even keep track at this point. But he's definitely met. I mean, to be honest, these people are very famous, some of them, so I feel like not saying their name might be a little silly. Obviously, Tom DeLonge,
yeah,
the Blink-182 vocalist, very nice guy. Dad even flew out with him on some expeditions, recovering some metals through some of my dad's other CIA contacts and things like that. And they did at one point request my dad to be a core member of TTSA, but he had to very politely decline because the nature of what they were trying to tell the world didn't align with his personal experiences, which he is totally unwilling to compromise on. He has been approached, various times where he could sell his life rights away and have lucrative deals, and he at every turn refuses those. And we did have to kind of officially, in that regard, part ways with TTSA, but we do still remain friends with some of the members. And they never said anything out of character or rude or hateful or anything of that nature. And every conversation we had with the members of TTSA have always been very positive and very fun. And like I've been to parties with some of these people, literal like holidays and birthday parties and bar mitzvahs and things like that. And they're definitely a fun group of guys to hang out with.
That's so cool. And I had a living in Las Vegas, I guess it's not that random, but I'm fairly like 99.9% sure that I said hi to Tom DeLonge one day. He said hi back. He said hi, and then we both got in our cars. It was very random. But I just figured, hey, that's got to be Tom DeLonge. And, I said, hey, Tom, and he turned and I said, hi. And he said, hi. And then we both got in our cars and I was just like, what just happened? But anyway.
Yeah, that's weird, man.
A close friend of mine explained it like it's sort of like a very small world, right? Once you're in it, it seems that
it is.
You start knowing people. And for example, your family introduced Diane Pasulka to the character from her hot selling book, American Cosmic. I mean, things like that are very synchronistic. Have you noticed that along the way?
Well, yeah. I mean, just the fact that we're talking now to me is profoundly weird. I just went to a show in Las Vegas and had a seat, and you were next to me, and I recognized you because I had known you from the internet. Mm-hmm. and likewise, you recognized me, and things like that seem to happen all the time. In this world, or just in general, I think consciousness is compelled to lead you towards the individuals and the circumstances in your life that you are meant to experience.
So true. And getting to these experiences, because there is this, it seems like power elite expanding a narrative that is contrary to what may possibly be the greatest thing that humanity has ever come across. And you read about it throughout history. How far back does this go? How far back is it that people have been trying to kind of keep this on the hush?
Since Egypt, since the peak of Egyptian civilization. And, if you study the esoteric past, so to speak, this is not something that I would wager no living American human being has ever learned of this sort of knowledge in school. Reason being, it was created by the Rockefeller family, the standardized education system, and they sort of like tailor the history that they want us to learn, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember learning nothing about Egyptian civilization or initiatory orders or like the true past of religions and all that good stuff. And when you study esoteric traditional history, you'll pretty much all roads point to Egypt and the mystery schools there and how they would initiate into the deeper mysteries of the cosmic intelligence behind this reality. And they kind of like spread into Europe, and then you had the alchemical Renaissance explosion and the Kabbalists and like the Rosicrucians, and then later the Freemasons and the Templars and all that good stuff. It's all traced back to Egypt, this occult knowledge.
I could not agree more, man. You are slamming them out of the park. And
Thank you.
This is so important because so many people give these occult mystery schools a hard time. But to be quite honest, for many outsiders or those who know nothing about this, it might be the only ladder to grab onto to get any information at all, because so much of it has been hidden throughout all
Yeah.
time. And that's
I
kind
agree.
of, that's why they've kind of had to be mysterious and occult, right?
Right.
So let's, this is really interesting, because I find it fascinating that these entities, I mean, this just is just mind blowing, and I hate to get biblical with it, but my mind,
Do it. I love getting biblical.
man, my mind always goes to like when the Nazarene is born there in at Bethlehem, and you have, you know, this angel come down out of the sky, and the Bible says, you know, that it's literally telling the shepherds to calm down and not be afraid of it. I think that's important to take into consideration, because
Right.
you know, the media's depiction of angels is, you know, something fluffy on your, you know, it's like not exactly what they.
Right. Yeah, and that came from the Vatican anyway, which is the biggest control system in history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the way they depicted angels as little babies with wings. You know, if you look at cultures throughout the ancient past, almost every culture described them as terrifying, fiery beings that when they come down, people fell prostrate on their face in fear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's 100%. And I always say this analogy, like if we're just going to look at nature itself, you know, you see this majestic grizzly bear in the woods. Maybe not a good example because it's not quite as consciously evolved as we are, or beings of light, and it doesn't know any better. It might actually attack you. But taking that out of the equation, you know, you see this grizzly bear in the woods, and it looks so profoundly terrifying. It has claws, it has teeth, and really it's just doing what it does, and it just survives and it eats. It's not an evil being, but, you know, I definitely wouldn't want to be next to one. I wouldn't want to see one. It might scare the life out of me, you know, and that's just kind of like what I want people to understand. Just because something appears to not be pretty to the eyes or not be soothing or comforting, it doesn't mean that it's evil.
Absolutely. I mean, just raw power, a very capable alpha predator if need be, if it's challenged. And, you know, and it needs to be that way, because as we've seen historically, there are very capable other things that need challenging from time to time. And
Right.
This is an interesting task that I find people are interacting with, noticing, and it seems more and more we are watching the watchers, the ones that are kind of watching us, right? We are interested. I'm with you 100% that there is a care scenario going on, that they care about us, because many individuals who have been in these realms for long periods of time, if they didn't care, these individuals would be long gone. And it's amazing that it is amazing to me that this interaction is taking place. What is it that could be the determining factor for them allowing humanity to see them?
That's a good question. Let me ask you a counter question so I can understand. Do you mean like on an individual level, like anybody to see them, period, or do you just mean like as society, like what would it take to be revealed their nature?
Wow, those are all three amazing. I was going to go super basic, just like, you know, somebody actually having a UFO experience and then they question their reality, right? It's almost like there's an ascension just with seeing one.
Yep, let's go there first. That's kind of what I was hoping you were asking. So with my dad having been, you know, it's no secret that he's a very well-known UFO guy for 15 years now, and he has always left his social medias open for messages, his emails and things like that. And he's getting quite busy now where he can't get through it as much as he used to, but he has had quite literally thousands of messages in the past 15 years. And now I'm approaching hundreds and hundreds. Like, you know, I can't even keep up anymore since I've gone public myself. And I say that because it's important to understand that the majority of these messages usually have two ways that they go when we open it, both of us. And it's either, hey, I heard your story, totally changed my life, or I've been having orb experiences, so-and-so in my family died, or I have this disease or this profound trauma, and I'm very much shortening. It's obviously way more heartfelt than that, but and like the consensus is the people at home who tend to see these experiences have suffered some profound loss or medical disorder or something that caused them to be in an extreme place of trauma and suffering. And, some of our chats with the CIA have kind of illuminated that to us as well. They even have studies on that in their agencies with other people who have experienced these beings. And it tends to be people who have been traumatized in some way throughout their life, which was also the case initially with my father. He was in the worst period of his life, right when he had this encounter. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be that these beings come typically right on the other side of that as kind of like a signal, like hope for the future, or, kind of change people's lives and put them on another path. And I tend to think that not anybody can just walk out and see these things. It's really an intimate spiritual experience for those who need it and are actually ready on a soul level. It's not random. Anytime these beings are seen or witnessed or whatever, it is never random.
And with that, it seems that tap on the shoulder, that cosmic tap on the shoulder, that something exists that was previously, that someone's mind previously did not believe existed, that seems to open a bunch of doorways. And right. It's almost, well, it is very spiritual. And when you look up the words like cosmic, I like that word because it has really kind of a better, I think, altruistic description of the nature of that reality than what we are usually spoon-fed, which is like, so another thing that I think, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And with all of this going on, and the media's attention towards this, I'm brought back to the realization that if people are seeing them, if humanity is seeing these lights in the sky, these unidentified aerial phenomena or UFOs, whatever you want to call them, these angels, these cosmic entities, these interdimensional or ultra-terrestrial intelligences, we are noticing something. This should be, in my opinion, a kind of a jump start or a hint for us to do something. And I wanted to kind of go down that pathway. What, as individuals, is this prompting us to do other than just become better individuals?
I think the ultimate revelation from these experiences that humanity desperately needs to hear, but the mainstream media will probably never do it. Hope they do, but I don't have faith that they will. But the ultimate revelation, in my opinion, is that there is without a doubt a higher power. I don't necessarily want to get into the specifics, like is it the Bible, is it the Quran, is it the Bhagavad Gita? And in total reality, I think what's been going on here throughout human history is it's actually all of them. And, our history is extremely long. I mean, we only have about 10 to 12,000 years of even recorded history. And every couple thousand years, some sage or prophet pops up and comes up with these profound revelatory messages, and then religions are created that are, observed for thousands and thousands of years. And I think we're kind of at the cusp of this spiritual evolution where we should realize as a species, maybe the ultimate truth is that there just is a cosmic power that is ultimately good and benevolent and positive, and every living and non-living thing that's manifested in this universe exists on varying degrees of reality, yet in total harmony with this original source. And that's why the golden rule is the most important thing ever. Do unto others only as you would do unto yourself. Because if we're all these spiritual beings who come from the same spiritual world, in some way we're all one, why would I want to hurt or harm or defame my neighbor who is just as equally and profoundly important and special as I am? And not only that, but we're part of that same consciousness, So I think people need to really read the golden rule and even the things that Jesus said and Zoroaster, and try to transform their inner nature to have very positive thoughts, positive words, positive deeds towards other people, and just basically, to sum it up, love.
Great description. And something really cool that I cannot remember where or when I heard your father say this, but he mentioned that it's much like a light switch. If things are dark, just turn on the switch. It's that easy. And, that's amazing. That philosophy is so stunning to me. this is, in my opinion, this is important. This is very revelatory that there is so much attention being given to something that has been suppressed for so long. And I think that there's probably, I'm guessing, a kind of some darker individuals with not great intentions that are not too happy that there is so much of this attention and these real sightings taking place.
That's true. That's absolutely true. Yep. And we were approached by some of the people in, and then I'll very carefully say associated with the CIA, who basically told us about that. And they came flat out and said that they, go to Bohemian Grove and do all these kinds of dark practices and are very interested in kicking off the New World Order and all this really dark stuff, and actually levied some death threats on our family, which obviously never came to fruition. And, I've pretty much realized at this point that they have no legal grounds to harm us in any capacity, as much as they have wanted us to believe that. But yes, that's absolutely correct. There are still groups in power who don't want this truth to get out. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Just turn on the news and everything is war, disease, COVID, fear, end of the world, World War III. Why would they be televising that every second of every hour worldwide? Other than to cause fear and terror.
That's exactly it. Just fear. And it's part of the narrative. It's like that whole abundance versus scarcity narrative. And they want you to believe that this false evidence is real. And they want you to live depending on them and not being self-reliant, or even better, reliant on a higher power. Right.
But what if we all did find out that not only is there a higher power, but each of us have access to it within our own consciousness? So what if we were all a tiny piece of that higher power? And that's actually the requirement to have a physical life in the first place. What if everybody learned that ancient truth? It'd be a different world.
Oh my gosh, wouldn't it? That's amazing. That's so, and it's, a lot of people are troubled and afraid these days. And, a message like this, I am reminded of how significant a simple message like that is to just the public in general, just that we have power of our lives. We're more significant than we believe we are or are told we are. We're not just another brick in the wall. We are whatever we want to be. And from your perspective, there seems to be a prelude to this. Every generation has these gatekeepers of knowledge, these burners of the Library of Alexandria, people that they just want to burn it all down because they don't want to give up control and power. And it's very archonic.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And I would say that the Vatican is probably the most guilty of this. I mean, they killed people for thousands of years just for, thinking outside of the box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. So true. But I'll tell you what, gosh, what I wouldn't do to look in those archives. My goodness.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool, huh?
It would be so cool. Chris.
There's actually a picture of my dad in there, by the way.
Oh my gosh, no way. So I was just going to ask you about that. Your dad and your younger brother, Chris, had this experience. I'm sorry, older brother.
It's okay.
Chris, they had an experience that was very intriguing. And I want to get into how MUFON handled that and what your opinion was of that really quick as we wrap up, if we can.
Sure, yeah. So it wasn't good. They didn't handle it good, I'm going to be honest. On the one hand, they showed up. So they told us face-to-face that they get about 2,000 reports a month. And that was back in 2007. I imagine it's way more now. And that's the reason they told us in the first place. They were so interested in our case the second it was published, because they get 2,000 or whatever reports a month, and they just sift through them and don't even give them attention. And then when my dad wrote his report, the words and the descriptions that he used, and then later they sent us a packet in the mail, and the pictures that my dad drew were kind of like a red flag. They knew right away that it was legitimate, because this kind of experience has been described for decades and who knows, maybe even centuries. And again, that's something I later in my adult life asked that same individual I was referring to earlier, the extremely high-level CIA guy, and I asked him when did you know about our family? And he kind of smiled, and he said the second it was reported.
Wow.
You know, like, yeah. And he told me that the case had been passed around the intelligence agencies. His words were, it's the number one studied UFO case of all time across the global intelligence agencies. And anyway, so he did tell me that the guy who was in charge of MUFON at the time, who was mysteriously installed, what this individual told me was that guy was a lower-level CIA dude whose basic job was to get in there, hack our story to death, and then get out. And when they showed up on our property, so now we're going back in time to 2007. When they showed up, we didn't know any of this. Okay, we had the experiences. I was a 13-year-old kid. My brother was like 17. We're all kids, right? Hadn't met anybody in the government yet. Dad puts a story out there on the internet on MUFON.com, and then they start showing up, telling us they want to help us and you know, like, vindicate our family and show us to the world, and it's going to be a blockbuster hit. And we believed them naively. And very excited. They start getting on the production the following summer, and then they weren't exactly always polite to us in the way that they dealt with us. I'll just leave it at that. And they essentially discarded a lot of the data that they found on our property, like radiation samples in the grass and in the trees where the entity was standing. As a matter of fact, where the entity was standing in our yard, it had become so irradiated that limbs, major limbs, were falling off and turning orange. They didn't air any of that. They found samples in the grass, didn't air any of that. All they aired was the talking and the story and the speculation, and then the botched lie detector test, which in reality what happened there was they asked my dad 30-plus questions over 4 hours until he finally got an inconclusive answer. And then they ran with that publicly. And overall, not good. Not a good experience, not a genuinely altruistic organization, and I would honestly caution people to be very careful of any public organization that deals with any sort of UFO descriptions or investigations or anything like that. Because from my experience, which, you know, I would wager to say has been very intimately involved in this world, probably more than most, is that it is a very slippery slope to being abused and lied to and lied about.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. It does seem that these organizations have a one-way valve, and information goes in and nothing comes out. Now, as we wrap up here, I really want to get into your podcast because it's one of the best out there, in my opinion. Can you
Thank you so much.
Yeah, can you tell our listeners where they can listen to it, subscribe on YouTube, etc.?
Absolutely. So it is called Bledsoe Said So, like my last name, Bledsoe. It's pretty much on all major platforms like Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Very soon it will be uploaded to Patreon. We just don't have an official release date on that yet. But, you know, if they're following our channels like Twitter and Instagram, they'll see all those updates. And then as well, we are also on Rockfin, ROKFIN. And just for simplicity, it's just called Bledsoe Said So across the board. That's
great. And getting back to the task, the very last kind of question I have, these spiritual entities that have been talked about for millennia that we know of.
Forever.
Yeah. They've always been described in parlance of the times. So, you know,
yes.
Flying carpets or Vimanas, or it's, you know, wheels in the sky. It seems like this is so obvious at least from my perspective, but the semantics, a lot of people get caught up in it and they get stuck in the mud and they lose track of it. It seems like the modern buzzwords, as you mentioned, ultra-terrestrial, interdimensional, how can people rise above that, not get stuck in the mud with the semantics, and do research with ufology in a positive way that incorporates what you've found?
Honestly, this might be an answer you didn't expect, but I really encourage people to look into the events of my family and what has happened, and just a simple Google search at all these government agents who we've been kind of hinting at, and like there's photos online of all this, you know, digital receipts of all this having really happened, and I would just urge people to walk away with this, that whatever you're being told in the mainstream, always double check it. And honestly, I would say reprogram yourself to not ever believe it at first sight or first time hearing it or whatever. And, the fact of the matter is here that there has been an agenda since recorded history for we'll just call them the priestly class, to suppress the masses and have a very limited understanding of our inner nature and our personal power that we contain as all of us being souls that, are coming into this world to learn lessons and to kind of spiritually evolve. And I would just say that when you have people in the mainstream media telling you that actually in reality it's all some accidental biological explosion of amoebas and soup in the ocean crawling out, and you're on a spinning rock going through an infinite void, and actually nothing matters whatsoever philosophically, and you should just look at the data and the hard facts. If you're kind of like invested into that, you should take a step back and say, well, maybe there is something more. Maybe there is something profound behind why I can even speak and interact with other conscious beings in the first place. Maybe that in and of itself is magical.
Man, you nailed it. You nailed it. And this has been amazing. This podcast went exactly where I wanted it to go, and I didn't think that it would go that way. So I'm really glad that you took it there, man. And you discussed these entities of light, that something that I think is a good way to discuss this intelligence. And thanks again for coming on. And until next time, I hope all is well, and we do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can set it up, man. And, I just have to say, we'll just have to have a follow-up conversation about possibly getting you on my show to talk Skinwalker.
Would love to. That would be great.
Okay, excellent. All right, man. Well, I actually really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Well, there you have it. Ladies and gentlemen, Ryan Bledsoe. We're talking about some of the most verified, real, legitimate encounters, connections, situations that continue to this day. A family that, in my opinion, is blessed, and these are spiritual entities who not only care about them, but they're keeping watch. I happen to believe, Ryan, and I think that his answer to my kind of wrap-up question was amazing. I really do believe that the Bledsoe family is the most authentic situation we have to descriptively and theoretically deal with something that has been manipulated from the media's perspective. And the narrative has been little green men in flying saucers. We need to turn that on its head. We need to concentrate on real encounters like the Bledsoe family's encounter, see what is being exchanged from an information perspective, because there's very real exchange of information. Attention being given to this from all kinds of operational forces, both in and out of the government. So let's get back to what's important. These instances of beings of light being witnessed throughout millennia has been documented. I mean, let's not get into the Quran. This is every culture has a version, if not multiple versions, of the same extremely important spiritual entities that are entering our reality and exiting with ease, able to bend space and time and manipulate a lot of other things. So, for those unaware with this new perspective of looking at the ET phenomena, the UFO phenomena, let's take it a little bit further and look at it through biblical and other formats, because this is very important data that we have at our disposal that many people aren't even looking at. They're not even looking at it. They're not even accepting the possibility, and I think that's unfortunate from a data collection perspective. This should be important. And something else that is important is, I can't remember where I heard it, but the gentleman that they introduced to Diana Pazolka, Tyler Durden, aka the character from Fight Club, is what he has been nicknamed. It was told that he was tasked to learn about the phenomena from a spiritual perspective. Sounds like a pretty good task to me. And I think we should all kind of task ourselves to do that and rise above the fear, rise above the control, and rise above the scarcity to an abundance, a living a little bit better than we are now. Until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off.